Hello and welcome to another Blue Tweezers production. This is for the intro for the playthrough of Multi-Man Publishing's Last Stand, The Battle for Moscow 1941-42. The designer is Masahiro Yamazaki. This is of course about Operation Typhoon in the end of 1941 to try and take Moscow before the winter set in on the Eastern Front, on the new Eastern Front. This has been issued before as a game on a smaller independent company, but Multi-Man Publishing has picked this up and has just recently released this back in August, July time. It's an operational level game. I think it's fairly similar in what it tries to do with the GMT's, what I like to call the apostrophe 4X games, such as Holland 44, Ardennes 44, Ukraine 43, and now Stalingrad 42. So it's a fairly similar scale. It has it's fairly reminiscent of the game in its gameplay. Very playable. Rules are not too long. Fairly well explained, very, shall I say, redundant in that it will repeat itself. So for example, the movement restrictions for zones of control will be repeated in the zones of control section, the movement section, possibly even the stacking section, which is very good for beginners, and this I think is a fairly good beginners hex and counter war game, though not completely straightforward. The sides are quite asymmetric. See, the way the German army works is very different from the Soviet army. There is also that differentiation is accentuated by the weather. So in clear weather, the capabilities of the German army is very good, excellent, and the Soviet army is nothing special. And then as we go through the bits of weather that happen in the game, through from the rain, mud, the frozen, and then the snow, the capabilities of both armies actually changed dramatically, culminating in sort of during the snow, very difficult for the Germans to do very much at all effectively in the game. It's also got a fairly interesting victory condition system, and I think it should be playable, maybe not an evening, it's certainly a one-day game or a sort of half-a-day game, shall we say, at a good pace. But if you're playing it leisurely, I should suspect it's probably going to be about a day. There are 12 turns in the game, although depending on the scenario you pick, there are 3 different scenarios. It's either 10 turns, 6 turns, or 12 turns, and the standard game is the full campaign, which is the 10-turn game. The 12-turn is an extended game, and the 6-turn is actually, rather than being as you normally get with these games, you've got a start at the beginning and then you only get sort of halfway. This actually starts halfway and takes you to the end, so it's actually with the Soviet counterattack. The focus, I think, for a lot of the interesting rules in the game are on the Soviet side. Certainly for the first half of the game, it's your kind of Barbarossa type scenario where the Germans are doing encirclements, overruns, taking huge swathes of territory, etc. So the first half is very reminiscent of your standard East Front game. And the Soviets are just kind of trying to get out of the way, trying to preserve their forces and trade a space for time. But around the sort of half to 2/3 game, particularly on the 10-turn game, it's about 2/3 of the way through, things stop being like that. But and that's not to say that the Russians can't do anything before then. The mud turns don't necessarily halt the Germans. It's just they find it more difficult to do things. It's really when the snow kicks in that there's a massive change. Frozen is sort of a strange halfway house. The Germans are capable of getting much further than they could in mud. However, there are some difficulties that they have. So that's the game, just a brief introduction, and we'll go through our usual thing, which is have a look at the counters, the map, the rules, etc. Then we'll be doing a playthrough of the full campaign, that's the 10-turn game. So we'll start by looking at the counters. Of course we have the Russian counters and the German counters here. Running through the Russian counters, they're actually the more complex. We have 3 types of combat unit, which is the infantry, the armoured unit, the tank unit and the cavalry. With these units in the game, as you'll see, they have one side which has a question mark. This is the many used concept of an untried unit. So until the moment of combat, neither side know how good the unit is. Of course, they can vary quite wildly. And the only difference between them really is the number of movement points. They have this white stripe, which throughout all the counters means they're a motorised unit, so they have a different movement characteristic and also some combat characteristics as well. Essentially, they have 2 values here, the question mark and then the movement factor. We also have on the counter a dot, a single dot. That's the number of steps, and so as you can see, these all have 1 step. So single step units, as soon as they take a loss, they're removed from the board. There is an exception to this for the Russians for the guard cavalry units. There's only 3 of these that appear in the game. They come on quite late and they have 2 steps, so you flip them over and they have reduced values. So the values, except for the question mark of course, when you turn these over, they have 3 values. So they are attack, defence and movement. So the movement's preserved from the question mark side, the untried side, and then you have an attack and defence. Now, interestingly enough, what you can tell from that is that units that have these 3 values, attack, defence and movement, they actually have a ZOC in the game. So anything with only 2 values when they're revealed will not have a ZOC. Also, helpfully, they will have a no ZOC written on them as well, but it's very easy to tell rather than looking at the little writing just to see whether there's 3 values or 2 values. And of course, as you can see, they vary quite wildly here. There are some supplementary units here. So these are Katyusha units. Again, there are a limited amount, only 3 in the game, come on quite late in the game. And they're sort of a barrage unit. You roll them up to the line and you do a kind of automatic attack with them, and then they're removed from the game. They're sort of one use, and you remove them. That's why they have this K value. So there's a chart in the combat table that has a K on it, and you use that, and never mind all the other shifts and circumstances. You also have HQs, and again, as you can see, these have only 2 values, so they have no ZOC. HQ is there for supply for the Russians, so they have a supply range of 5, but they are motorised. So a unit within 5 hexes of that HQ, with very few exceptions, will be supplied. If you're not, you're out of supply. There are also board edge capabilities of being supplied as well from the board edge directly rather than the HQ, but if you're not near the edge, then you use the HQs, and that's really the only way you can get supply, with a couple of exceptions. Okay, next we have these 2 units. This is a garrison unit, and it's actually quite important in the game. It's very important in the game. So it has no attack, it has 1 defence, no movement. So it's placed on the board on a particular, usually cities or towns, and they're fixed. They just stay there. And they have 1 defence, and they have a step. And because they have a defence, they do have a ZOC as well. However, the back of them is completely different. We move it around and it says Soviet damage. Now this is to do with Soviet morale, and I'll come on to that in a minute. And so when these garrison units are removed, they become Soviet damage markers on a track in the game. Also here you have a very similar unit, but different in its own way. This is the factory unit. So there are only 2 of these in the game, 1 in Moscow and 1 in Tula, in the 2 major cities. They have the same defense characteristics, but what they do when you remove them is they don't go anywhere, they just remove from the game. But their exceptional ability is that they are reinforcement points during the game for building units, and this is even if the city is isolated, so it can produce 1 unit per turn while it's still on the board. Again, it can be removed, it's a combat unit, it can be removed in a combat. One other thing you'll see here is that there's a supply symbol on them, which means that units with in the same hex as these units are supplied for combat, but that's all. So supplied for combat. So they will hold out, if you like, and they will supply for combat the units defending them as well. Okay, and one last thing I think which is relevant to the garrisons is that when reinforcements come in for the Russians, normally you have to be placed not within 5 hexes of a German unit. But there is an exception. The exception is onto a garrison. So you can place directly onto garrisons within that limit. So even if German units are right next door to them. So that kind of ability to defend them is much greater than normally in the game. Now we move on to the German units here. So these are infantry and tank and motorised infantry units. You will note that they have more than 1 dot, so they have steps. 2 steps, you will have a reduced unit on the back, a bit like the Guard Cavalry unit. 3 steps, which is usually the armoured or motorised units. They have a back, and then they have this kind of unit known as a camp group. So they're a replacement unit for if the unit takes a 2nd step loss. After that, then they're removed. Note that these, even though they do have a middling value for defence, don't have a ZOC though. That can be quite crucial sometimes. The relevant thing I wanted to show you here, because everything else is pretty much the same as the Russian units, well, firstly, there's no untried side, but secondly, is the colour coding of the unit types symbols in the game. So they're these are all the 6 colours you have, and they represent different armies in the game. So the supply system for the Germans is completely different than the Russians. So each of these armies have their own supply units. These are 2 examples here. This is the 9th Army and this is the 4th Panzer Army, and they've got the colour coding here. So 9th Army it is for here with the blues here. 4th Panzer Army is the oranges here. Now each army doesn't supply each other. They have their own supply arrangements with these supply units, and as you can see, they have an 8 hex range. So the supply is a lot more flexible with the Germans in this regard. However, you need to have supply for each of the armies here. There's no sort of homogeneous kind of supply available from these HQs. These HQs are not designated to a group of units. They're just on the board supplying whoever and whatever is within range. And that's the difference with the Germans here. Also, these actually have a dual use. So what you can do is you can turn these over at the end of the movement phase, before the combat phase, onto this, which is an offensive supply unit. And what this has, as you can see here, it has a 4 hex range, certainly not an 8, but it has 2 combat shift capabilities. So 2 attacks within 4 hexes range can get a combat shift. In fact, 2 combat shifts if these are used. But at the end of the combat phase, or after it's used the 2 for the 2 attacks, these are actually removed, and you have to build them back up or receive them as reinforcement. So they're 1 use. So while they're flipped over here, they can supply units. Once they're flipped over, then they're used for these combat shifts, and it's called offensive supply. That's pretty much it for the unit counters here. You do have designations here. This is the 20th Panzer Division from 4th Panzer Army. Just looking at some more counters here. These are informational counters which go on units. So placed on top we have the out of supply unit marker here, and it's good because the counter actually explains exactly what it does. It effectively halves every single one of the three values here. So effectively this would be a 2, 1.5, 4.5 unit, and the same here. And these can be used on both, but for both sides, of course. They have another side which is known as isolated. So this is the second effect of being out of supply. If you're out of supply for a second turn, you become isolated. That also means that you may actually surrender as well. And as you can see, again, it's self-explanatory. Everything's a quarter, so this will be a 1, 1, 2, I suppose, as a unit. The other marker here, other than the out of supply, I said, is the disruption marker. Two sides, and effectively it's on the colours for each side here. Little complaint here. This colour, when stacked, looks very much like another unit. So if you have a stack of units like this, imagine this is another Russian unit, you can falsely think that there's an extra unit here where actually it's the disruption. And particularly again on the German side as well, very close colour, and that's tricky for this. Disruption is what you get when you retreat in the game. So you get this marker on top, and it pretty much it restricts some of your combat capabilities and movement capabilities. Also means you don't have a ZOC either, and these are removed at the end of the game turn, at the end of the Soviet turn. Finally, here we have a particular Russian marker here. Looks like a unit, but it's not. It's a marker. This is to go on actually onto Russian infantry units. There's a couple of these markers in the standard game and an extra 2 in the extended game, and they come on as reinforcements, and you place them onto a unit, an infantry unit, and that effectively gives it capabilities to exploit and infiltrate, which a Russian infantry unit would never have, and they basically stick with that unit until that unit is destroyed, or it's the end of the game. So these represent ski mobile capability, which are added to units, and you're at liberty to put it on any unit. It was within 5 hexes of the HQ, which is known as the first SH, which is the first Shock Army HQ. But this is late in the game during snow, where this is deployed. The final set of counters I want to address here is to do with the garrisons, and this is the major part of the victory conditions here. So at the beginning of the game, there's a set of these markers. There's more of them than here, which are effectively put in a cup, and the marker is pulled out. It's known as preservation morale. You put one of these markers and then the rest go away, and this is placed into this box here known as the Soviet National Will. Now, the Soviet player doesn't know what it is, and the German player doesn't know what it is either. So you don't know what the number is underneath, and these all have individual numbers. And effectively this number corresponds to this track, the Soviet damage track. Remember I talked about the garrisons, when you turn them over, they become Soviet damage markers, and they stay like that for the rest of the game. So if we say that it was a combat and one of these was actually removed, eliminated, these are flipped over, and then they're placed in this box, which is the eliminated garrison box, and they stay there for the moment, and they don't really do anything. However, if a unit moves into the town or city where that marker was from, it doesn't matter which particular marker in this box you use, you place this marker on the hex, over here, called German Occupy. Again, slight whinge. This looks very much like the disruption marker, which also looks like the unit markers, and again, putting a stack of units on top, you can be a little bit misleading on what's underneath, and it may look like a unit. It would have been good if these occupy markers and also the disrupt markers had been slightly further, a slight different colour than the actual units themselves. They're a little confusing, a little bit annoying, particularly when you are looking for these in the game, which you'll sometimes, to try and just make sure that your accounting of this whole system is there as well. So you put this on the hex. At the point you put this on the hex, you take one of these Soviet damage markers and you put it on this track. And this track goes up to here, okay, up to 20, okay, and you will put successive numbers of these markers up. When you get to 10, what happens is that the morale of the Soviet army is starting to disintegrate, so therefore you get extra ships in combat for attacks by German units. So R1 is shift to the right 1, shift to the right 2, shift to the right 3. And if those Soviets ever take back that garrison hex, you flip this marker over to recapture, and you will then take the latest, the top marker of the Soviet damage off and put it back into this garrison box. So it becomes a kind of a stock, and this becomes the relevant track. Okay, so on top of this, let's say that you have Soviet damage up to number 13. When it gets to this stage, the German player can actually look at this unit, this preservation morale marker. Okay, look at the number. All right, that's when it first gets to 13. Also, you have these markers here, which are morale damage. They don't have a back. Now, when you get it, when an attack on Moscow is made, that is anything more than no result, a dice is rolled, and this kind of marker, which just hangs around for the game, is then additionally placed on the track, so they add to the Soviet damage. Okay, and these will stay there until the actual damage is less than 10. So if you like, these markers are taken off, these will drop until the damage becomes less than 10, and then you start removing these guys as well, because the damage to the morale of the fact that Moscow was attacked gets removed. However, there's another limit here, and as you can see, 13 isn't really mentioned as anything special here. The other one is 15, which again isn't mentioned as special either. Is that if the damage markers get to 15, remember the German player has actually looked at the morale marker. What the German player can instruct the Soviet player to do is to pick a new chit. Okay, and the attempt here is to try and for the Germans to get a chit which is smaller than 15. This one is 14, so that's fine. So it's, for example, if it was 18, then that's still not enough to win the game. What that means then is that if the damage level ever gets above this marker, whichever marker is placed there, remember the German can ask the Soviet to remove it, if it's ever greater, then the Germans immediately win the game. So the Soviets surrender. And that's really what the Germans are pushing for. So as you can imagine, this is why I said that the garrison markers are really very crucial to the game. It's fundamental to the Germans winning on an automatic victory, if you like. Just wanted to go through that with these counters because it's fairly intricate. And I know I was just going through the counters here, but I think the victory conditions are very useful here. One thing I'd also like to point out as I was looking in this area is this replacement waiting box. So this has a list of all the turns in the game, not 11 and 12, but the main turns in the game. And this actually is the number of replacement units that the Soviets get. So each turn you look on this, and these are eliminated units which come back. This is not reinforcements. There are reinforcements on top of this. So as you can see, it marches up and up and up towards the end of the game, and then has a peak and then starts to drop away. So just while we're here, just looking at that, thought I'd mention that. So here are the player age charts that come with it. There's one player age chart, two sides, so the back of this is that. So one side is the combat results table, the other side is movement and unit state and weather information. So looking at the combat results table here, so you have an odds table which is graduated by type of terrain. So terrain does shift, but it's factored into the combat results table itself. There is a simple odds calculation of attack and defence. More than one stack can attack a single hex in the combat. Not obliged to attack at all as well, but you can do that. So it's then this table here which gives you a set of results. Now note it goes from 0 to 9. Now it does come with a D10, the game, but it also comes with a D6. And this very interesting little mechanic here, which I quite like here, is that there are two types of attacks that can happen. There's a normal attack in the combat phase, and then there's an overrun which can happen in the movement phase. With an overrun you use the 10-sided dice. With a normal attack you use the 6. So you can see on this chart 1 to 6 as opposed to 0 to 9. And also note that of course there's a 0 here on this dice, so there is a result here that doesn't exist at the other end of the table for overruns as well. What this means is that getting a 0 in overrun is a bad thing. So overruns can go wrong worse than standard attacks because of you're on the move while you're doing the attack. It's not prepared. But also you do get the ability to have much better results. Now interestingly enough, this combat results table, if you want to stop the video and have a quick look at it, it's not particularly graduated bad to good. It kind of moves around a bit here, and of course there is the cut-off point between 6 and 7, which these results must be, and also the 0 must be an overrun result. So you never get it as a standard attack. So things change as well on that. So for example here, if we take a 3 to 2 on the clear, so results here, they kind of bow in and out. So they get better for the attacker in the middle, and is bad on two sides. But then the last three results are there is some result, but it's not a problem on losses or anything like that. So you get either a number or an L or an R, or there is an E. An E is eliminated. L and R means a loss and a mandatory loss, and an R is a mandatory retreat. Retreats are 2 hexes for the Germans, 3 hexes for the Soviets. But you also got numbers. Now the numbers are kind of variable. So if you get a number, say 2 here, 2 for the defender, that could be 2 losses, that could be 2 hexes retreat, or a combination of either. So you can take 1 loss and retreat 1 hex to fulfill that. So it's actually a lot more intricate than it kind of looks. This combat results table, quite a lot of thought has gone into it. There's not a lot of shifts in here. So the offensive supply I mentioned already gives you 2 shifts. An air point, and there are German and Soviet air points which you can add into attacks or defences, which will shift 2 columns as well. So there's no additions to the dice. It's all about column shifts there. Attacking across a river, you get half attack strength, except when it's snow. Out of supply and isolators, as you've seen, will halve and quarter values as well. So that's about it as far as modifications to the table. So it's fairly easy to use, but the results can be quite variable. Between sort of a 3 and a 2 or a 3 and a 4, and also how you take those losses with those numbers is worth study as well. So that's the combat results table there, and as I use it twice, overruns and standard attacks. So just looking over here, just going through some things here, which I will turn to also in the sequence of play. There's the instructions about overruns and infiltration movement. Infiltration movement is actually moving from Zoc to Zoc of the same unit. So there's restrictions on who you can do, who can do it, and also restrictions with overruns as well. Overruns cost 3 movement points plus cost of terrain from the unit that is doing it. But on top of that, there is eligibility idea, and that varies with weather. Okay, so with snow on overruns, the Soviets can overrun, but every other weather type the Germans can and the Soviets can't. So with the exception of rain, where motorised units can't overrun, but German foot units can. Infiltration movement, again, that varies by weather. In the same manner, motorised German units can do it with clear rain and frozen. In snow, only the Guard cavalry units, those 3 units I showed you, only those for both sides can do infiltration. Reaction and exploitation movement. So going through the sequence of play, there is a reaction movement phase for a reaction phase for the non-facing player in the facing player's turn. And there's also an exploitation movement phase for the facing player in the facing player's turn. So extra movement, usually either before or after combat. And finally, there's a discussion about out of supply, isolation and disruption, telling you what's the effects, halved and quartered, etc. Also, with disrupted, you're halved but you can't attack. And restrictions, other restrictions in place, it stops you doing overruns, can't do exploitation movement, can't do reaction movement. We also have about entrenchments here. Now, entrenchments exist on the board there. They're part of the map, and they are the defence lines. The defence lines the Soviets have. So they stop infiltration movement. The German motorised units pay +2 movement points to move onto that hex, even if it's not occupied. And other German units +1. Soviets don't pay anything. You can use road movements though to move through. On the Soviet side, the hex has an intrinsic +2 strength points, so you add 2 in combat in defence when you're on the entrenchment hexes. There's no removal of the entrenchment hexes. If they're reoccupied, they then have the capability, and it does absolutely nothing for the Germans in defence when they're in the entrenchment hex. And finally, you've got another ready reckoner here for weather, what you can and can't do in a clear, rain, frozen and snow turn. So as far as play raids go, it's short, sharp and does the business. I think they're very good, very useful. There's not a lot not on there that isn't actually displayed on the side of the board, which is also a player. The board itself is a bit of a player aid card in its own right, as we saw with the damage track and the replacement waiting box, and you could see a CRT next to them in the previous section. Okay, looking at the sequence of play here, extended sequence of play, which is on the back of the rulebook. Quite handy again, it's almost like its own player aid card. So we have a German player turn and Soviet player turn. Germans go first every turn. And generally what you have is supply with a few extra administrative steps, movement, combat, exploit, with a slight asymmetrical bent to this. So we have the supply phase here for both sides. German starts with the weather step, so the weather change or the weather set. So there are a set turns with the weather that's available, but there are also the capability of having variable weather as well. A reinforcement step to get reinforcements in. Germans get a few reinforcements and they don't get replacements, so they slowly grind down, if you like. Air power point step, that's you denote what air points you get, and you get given them by the turn record chart. Supply determination step, that's the supply phase. Check everybody on the German side is within 8 of a supply unit of the correct army, or you can also be in supply if you are near the German edge of the board. It's 8 hexes, and there is a slight emphasis on the number in the hexes of that column. It's not really very obvious. When you look at it, you go, oh yeah, they are pronounced, but it doesn't actually stand out that much. If you're on that column or towards the German side, you are automatically in supply anyway from the edge of the board, so you don't need the supply units. Isolation step is to check for surrender. That varies by weather. So for the clear, Germans will surrender, the Soviets won't. With the rain, both will. With frozen, the Germans are very likely to surrender, Soviets not so much. And then finally on snow, the Germans very likely to surrender and the Soviets not at all. And it's all done on a dice roll. You either need a 2 or a 4 depending on what side you are and what the weather is. You just lose a step if you fail. Supply attrition step, that's what we were looking at there. And the preservation with redraw step, so we went through that with, if it gets to the Soviet damage of 15, the Germans can ask for a redraw of the preservation morale counter by the Soviets. Then we have the movement phase, so movement including overrun, and then a supply mode step. So that supply mode step is whether you're going to flip over those supply units to be offensive supply temporary units. At that point, ready for the combat phase. The Germans then have their combat phase, combat resolution, and then they remove the offensive supply units from the board that we used up during the turn. Even if you only use one of the attacks, or even none of the attacks, you will still remove that marker. Then the Soviets get a reaction phase, which is usually half movement, and usually only a couple of armoured stacks. Then you have the German exploit movement, which is usually units which are not in a ZOC, not disrupted, isolated, out of supply isolated. They can move half movement again, and usually you can do overruns at this point as well, depending on the weather and the side you are. That completes the German player's turn. Then it goes to the Soviets' turn. They have their reinforcement step. The weather stays the same, of course. Air power points. Supply determination step. So this is again whether you are within 5 of the red board edge, which is most of the non-German board edge. Whether you're within 5 of that, you're in supply, and also 5 of an HQ. Now, interesting about an HQ is that if it gets removed from the game, it can be attacked, but there's no combat roll. You just remove it as an eliminated unit. When it comes back, it actually comes back as what's known as a reconstituted HQ, and its supply range is only 4 instead. On the back, there's a 4 for the supply range on the counter, and you use that forevermore, even if it gets removed. Also, if it does get removed, there is a chance it won't come back at all. So you need to roll the dice to see whether it will come back next turn, whether it will come back in 2 turns, or will it never come back at all. And it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on a d6 to find out about that. And of course, with supply on both sides, ZOCs matter. So if you're surrounded by ZOCs and enemy units, you are out of supply. It doesn't matter how close you are to anything. Units adjacent do break that ZOC restriction, so you can get supply through an adjacent unit. And that even for things like you're sitting on a garrison unit or you're sitting on a factory unit, which will supply you for the combat, it doesn't stop you getting an out of supply or an isolation marker. You then have the Katyusha movement of fire. They're only one use, so it's not a big deal in the game, these two. And that gives you the supply phase. Then the Soviet movement phase. And again, they may be able to overrun with their cavalry units towards the end of the game, but other than that, you don't get overrun. Then the German reaction movement phase, so like the Soviet one, but it happens before the Soviet combat phase. And that is, again, is 2 stacks of motorised units, not in ZOC and without any disruption, supply problems, etc. Then you have the Soviet combat phase. You have the ski troop marker segment, so you designate at that point, if you haven't already designated any ski troops. Then you have the combat resolution step, so again, standard combat. After that, you then get the exploit movement phase. So combat, then exploit, but the German reaction is shifted earlier before the combat phase. Half movement for units, not in ZOCs and not in any particular difficulties. Move the game turn marker and off we go again. So that's our sequence of play. So it's got a fairly decent rhythm to it. You get used to it fairly quickly. But do worry about the supply situation. You don't really want to be out of supply or isolated unless you can't help it, because it does really affect the unit very badly. So just looking at the map here, and in detail for the terrain. So we have clear hexes. Woods hexes are most of it. We have our entrenchment line hexes. Doesn't matter about the direction on this. Swamp, we have towns, and we also have cities as well. And we have the start line. It looks like a sort of border, but it is just the start line. Here's a city here in red, as opposed to the sort of brown colour, smaller brown colour here. We have starting unit markers here as well, so you can set up fairly straightforwardly. You can set the Russians up historically. They do have hex numbers on the backs of some of the counters, or you could do a kind of random, which is you just place the untried unit side down and you don't know what they are, which I think is probably a lot preferable. Really, I don't see why you would do anything other than that. This is the German board edge for supply, and the supply points here are for the individual armies are labelled, and supply is provided by roads or railways. So the railways don't help with movement at all, but your supply units, your mobile supply units for the Germans, they will supply 2 units within 8, but they also have to trace a supply line themselves to do that, and that has to be via road or rail back to their particular labelled supply source on the edge of the board. That's beyond your 8 hex limit, which again I said it is slightly emphasised here. This is the line, but probably not emphasised enough. A kind of shading might have been better. We have rivers here and can provide a shift attacking over, and they disappear in frozen and snow, of course, and they become more difficult to cross in rain, of course. That's the terrain here. On the roads, there is one primary road, which is the road going up to Moscow from Smolensk, and all the others are this sort of dark brown colour, which are secondary roads. Secondary roads disappear in rain and snow, so they don't exist. Finally, if we just take a look at Ryshev here, so this is the town, but it has a little Soviet hammer and sickle flag on there. This is where you will place a garrison marker. As you can see, it's got the same flag on it. And this is where you would place your German occupy or recapture markers for the Soviet morale. One thing I do need to mention, of course, is stacking. And stacking is 2 units in a hex. It's actually enforced the end of each phase throughout the game turn, so including retreats and things like that. The only exception to that is the Russian Guard cavalry units, which can only stack on their own. However, things like garrisons, HQs, supply units, and other markers, they don't count against stacking. It's only combat units that do. So beyond that, what I'd like to do is just highlight a few bits around the board. As I said, the board is almost like a little player's aid card itself. There's the German and Soviet supply requirements here, the 8 hexes or the 5 hexes with the supply units. One thing about the supply units is, and it's over here, is this table. Now once snow happens, the German supply situation becomes critical. And what happens is you roll the dice on this table, it's 1 to 6, and it's got 2 of the armies noted on it. For those armies, you take 1 supply unit of each army and you return it to the original supply source on the German edge of the board down here. So you can imagine this makes a bit of a problem, especially if the Germans are up around here around Moscow. Moscow's here. So getting that supply unit back up doing supply is very tricky and can lead to out of supply situations, especially if you only have 1 of those units for the army. Each infantry army has 2 of the units available, not necessarily on the board at any one time, and the panzer armies have 3 available. You have reinforcement deploy here. And then you have the stacking limit information here, information about the ski troops, preservation morale table. You have the terrain effects here. We covered the damage track and the garrison box and the replacement box here. Here you have the phase record track. You have the national wheel box where we have the preservation morale as we went through. Here we have the air point record track. So if we turn, there will be some air points for either or both sides. We have the weather effects track here. So again, this is another place where you can check eligibility and the effects of weather. And finally the turn record track, so our 10 turns, the extra 2 if you're using the extended game. And it gives you the historical weather as the colours, tells you the number of supply units the Germans get per turn, air points down the bottom, general idea of who gets reinforcements on the particular turn with the emblem from the 2 sides. Just want to mention the last thing, which would be zones of control. So it's +1 to move into a zone of control, it's +1 to leave, but I think, as I stated before, to move directly from one ZOC to the other, it costs +3. However, only certain units can do it, and these would be motorised units on the German side for clear, rain and frozen, and for the Soviet Guard cavalry in the snow turns. ZOCs are cancelled for things like supply, etc., and retreat, but they're not for movement. So if you're stuck surrounded by ZOCs, then you can't move out. It doesn't mean that you can't attack, it's just that you can't move directly from ZOC to ZOC if you're not a motorised unit or Guard cavalry unit. So that's it, and we'll end the video there, and we'll be starting turn 1 of the full campaign in the next video. Bye for now.